Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Steven with Freeze Peach Gaming. This is where I talk about politics, pop culture, and where the two collide. And today's story is a perfect example of where the two collide. This is coming from Bounding into Comics. Let me go ahead and pull it up here. This is about how EA has targeted Kyle Rittenhouse's account. He had an account on, I believe, Call of Duty would be my assumption. That was what was talked about most in the court case. And they have removed it because he used the name, "This is Kyle Rittenhouse," and their quote on it was an inappropriate reference for violence, terror, and tragic events. He can't even use his own real name now. Here is an image of the actual email that they sent him. It says, "Hello," and this is to the account, "This is Kyle Rittenhouse." It says, "Hello, we received a report about your account or profile name. It may be the name you created on another platform. This name breaks our positive play charter because you may have used words or phrases that harm others or negatively disrupt the game. Here's the violation we see. On Steam, he used an inappropriate reference of violence, terror, and tragic events. Username Kyle Rittenhouse." So they even specify right here at the bottom of the email that it was in reference to the name Kyle Rittenhouse. This isn't for other reasons. It is specifically for this reason. And it brings up a lot of people like to talk about Orwellian, but I think this is actually a bit closer to Bradbury with Fahrenheit 451. Which is much more about the controlling of language and the controlling of, just what is censored and what is allowed to be censored, how we censor, and they had a very broad swath in Fahrenheit 451 for what was allowed and what was not allowed. But we're getting ever closer to the strongest amount of censorship we've ever seen in this country. We had it before, and it was fought back against by people like Lenny Bruce and George Carlin, to where you could easily be jailed for saying something offensive in public, and that was determined to be against the First Amendment. And I think it's very good that we have much stronger safeguards for the First Amendment and not against the First Amendment. I think it's important for offensive speech to be heard, especially in public, and, I understand EA has the right to determine whatever they want, but we're getting to the point where censorship is not being done by the government, but on behalf of the government by private organizations. There are plenty of people within our government who are calling for more of this style censorship to be used on what are now becoming our public forums. This is where a lot of people talk to each other, places like social media. This is where a lot of people learn their ideas. This is where a lot of people are coming to hear other people speak. And it's, things get very quickly and very rapidly more and more offensive and hateful, that they claim to be hateful, I should say. And it really worries me because this is a concept that I like to use whenever I'm trying to determine something that I think should be or should not be permissible, not only in a court of law, but in public discourse. I don't think that there should be any rules put in place that you wouldn't be willing to have used against you by the opposition. So, for instance, whenever we see people typically on the left, the far left, are claiming, we need to make sure that there are safeguards on hate speech and these things can't be heard in polite discourse or throughout polite society. How would they feel if, let's say, Black Lives Matter was determined to be a terrorist organization by whatever the next administration is to come in, and then any ideology or any speech that has to do with Black Lives Matter now becomes impermissible? How would they feel if that were the case? Or by extension, because Black Lives Matter is inherently a Marxist organization, now Marxism can't be spoken openly without threat of violence, that being getting jailed. So I think that's a concept that a lot of people they don't consider throughout everyday life. They don't like to think about what the other side of the equation would be if they are trying to place rules upon certain types of speech, certain types of expression, and I realize freedom of expression is not an actual thing, but this is a very troubling issue to where the guy can't even use his own name. He was acquitted in court. He had done nothing wrong according to a court of law, and if you watch the videos, it's pretty clear that he obviously had to defend himself. He had tried to retreat, which he did not have a duty to do. He had attempted to retreat as much as he possibly could until he hit a a stopping point, in which case he had to turn around to defend himself. And he attempted to do that a second time after he did have to shoot the Rosenbaum. He attempted to turn himself into the police, and on the way to turning himself into the police, people attacked him. Now, this is something that just is clearly not permissible. You can't attack people based on assumptions. You can't, and a lot of people on the left, particularly on Twitter, are saying things like, oh, well, he was causing a danger to the public and they had the right to disarm him. No, you don't. You do not have a right to disarm other people. That is not the way to go about it. I mean, even when you are armed, if someone is, say, trying to rob you, they don't tell you to try and disarm the person who is actively trying to rob you. You're supposed to give them whatever they want, and if it gets to the point where you believe you have to defend yourself, that's when you should. At least that's what's taught in most self-defense courses. Now, legally, if someone is trying to rob you, and they are doing so with, especially if they're armed, that point in time, you are legally allowed to defend yourself. But you can't have a proactive defense. You can't attack somebody who isn't aggressive against you in self-defense. That's not how these things work. But I'm really troubled by this because we're getting closer and closer to what we saw in Fahrenheit 451, where speech was almost entirely controlled and things weren't allowed to be read even. The censorship was particularly about books, but included speech. Now, they weren't quite as totalitarian in Fahrenheit 451 as they were in, say, 1984, which is commonly brought up and does have to do with censorship. Let me bring this up on the big screen again. Let me put me on full camera. So, Fahrenheit 451 had more to do with censorship and the controlling of thought, whereas Orwell, in my opinion, 1984, had more to do with social engineering, the loss of privacy, loss of individuality, and mass surveillance. But I have a couple of quotes here from Bradbury that I would like to read to you. If you don't want a man unhappy politically, don't give him two sides to a question to worry him. Give him one. Better yet, give him none. Let him forget there is such a thing as war. If the government is inefficient, top-heavy, and tax-mad, better it be all those than people worry over it. Peace, Montauk. Give the people contests they win by remembering the words of more popular songs, or the names of state capitals, or how much corn Iowa grew last year. Cram them full of non-combustible data. Chock them so damn full of facts they feel stuffed, but absolutely brilliant with information. Then they'll feel their thinking. They'll get a sense of motion without moving, and they'll be happy, because facts of that sort don't change. And this encompasses a lot of what we see in modern day debate over whether or not something should be hate speech. A lot of times you hear people saying things that are just considered to be facts. You hear a lot of axioms spoken, but nothing that can be proven positive or proven true. For instance, we often hear that using someone's improper pronoun or dead naming them is violence against that person and could cause them significant harm. Now, a lot of times these are brought up as the reasons that this is brought up is because supposedly there is a high level of violence in the trans community or against the trans community, but I think what we commonly see, I would have to pull up the statistics, but what we see commonly with violence in general is that it's people within the group causing violence against people within the group. That is just typically what we see. That's a generalization. But it's also brought up the suicide rates, and I would posit, in my opinion, that the suicide rates have more to do with the failure to treat any gender identity disorders as a mental illness rather than treating them as a social harm or a social issue. We allow these people to go by the wayside, and we allow their mental health to go by the wayside because it is politically incorrect. Now, many people always say, like, oh, we don't want government control over these things. However, with other governments more increasingly making it illegal for you to dead name someone or to use their improper pronouns, we also become more susceptible to that because, especially on the left, other societal standards are often tried to place upon us. We saw that with the Affordable Care Act. We always heard about how every other modernized country or every other Western country throughout the world has some sort of Medicare for all or some sort of public health care. So because of that, obviously we need it too. So what happens when using the improper pronouns becomes hate speech because other countries do it, and they start whittling away piece by piece our First Amendment rights. So that is sort of what they were talking about in that quote. Here's another quote. This one has a bit more to do with censorship on its own. Colored people don't like Little Black Sambo. Burn it. White people don't feel good about Uncle Tom's Cabin. Burn it. Someone's written a book on tobacco and cancer of the lungs. The cigarette people are weeping. Burn the book. Serenity, Montauk. Peace, Montauk. Take your fight outside. Better yet, into the incinerator. Funerals are unhappy and pagan. Eliminate them too. 5 minutes after a person is dead, he's on his way to the big flu. The incinerator's serviced by helicopters all over the country. 10 minutes after death, a man's a speck of black dust. Let's not quibble over individuals with memoriams. Forget them. Burn all. Burn everything. Fire is bright, and fire is clean. And this is the stage that I believe we are getting ever closer to where certain information is starting to become hateful and dangerous, and that's exactly what we're seeing with this Kyle Rittenhouse instance. His very name is harmful to other people to hear. His very name. He can't even use his given Christian name. That is hate speech, and that is what we are getting to. Uncle Tom's Cabin can't be talked about anymore. Little Black Sambo can't be talked about anymore. These things are dangerous for certain people to hear. They will be offended, they will be harmed, they will be hurt, and we have to protect people from hearing dangerous ideas. This is the world we're growing closer to day by day, and piece by piece, and step by step. These big tech companies are now trying to control what is permissible for us to say, for us to think, for us to do, what is permissible for us to know. And that is truly the dangerous part. What information we are allowed to have, given freely. They do this despite the First Amendment, despite claiming to be champions of free speech. But I'll let you know, I'm here to always stand for free speech. Have a wonderful day, ladies and gentlemen, and never be afraid to speak your mind.
A thief, a pedophile, and a wife beater walk into a bar. Kyle Rittenhouse stands up and says, "Shots on me, boys! Oh, waka waka!"